There is a moment in life that does not knock loudly, does not wait patiently, and does not repeat itself, and most people miss it without even realizing it. Not because they are careless, but because it arrives in a form they do not expect. Quiet, subtle, easy to ignore, and easy to dismiss as just another ordinary experience. But what if that moment was never ordinary at all? What if it was the turning point that could have changed everything? And what if the opportunity you are still waiting for has already passed right in front of you, unnoticed, unrecognized, and now fading into the background of your past? Because the truth is simple and uncomfortable. The most important signals in life are rarely obvious. They do not come with clear labels. They do not announce themselves twice, and they do not wait for you to feel ready. They appear once, briefly, and then they are gone. And most people spend years thinking they are stuck, when in reality they are standing in the shadow of a moment they failed to act on. And this is where everything begins to shift. Because this video is not just another motivational message. It is a deeper look into the patterns that quietly shape decisions, the hidden signs that show up before major life changes, and the psychological reasons why the human mind often ignores what matters most, even when it is right in front of it. And there is a reason this happens, a reason why hesitation feels safer than action, why overthinking feels smarter than trusting instinct, and why waiting feels more comfortable than moving forward, even when something inside keeps pushing. And in the next few minutes, you will start to see these moments differently, not as random events, but as signals with meaning, signals that appear before growth, before loss, before transformation. And once you begin to recognize them, it becomes impossible to unsee them, because there are patterns that most people overlook: small shifts in emotion, sudden changes in direction, unexpected discomfort, recurring thoughts that refuse to disappear, and even losses that feel painful but quietly open new doors. And these are not coincidences, they are part of a deeper structure that influences how lives change over time. And what makes this even more important is that research in human behavior and decision-making shows that people often regret the chances they did not take far more than the ones that failed. Not because failure is easy, but because missed opportunities leave questions that never get answered. And those questions stay longer than any temporary setback. And this is where awareness becomes powerful, because once you understand how these signs work, you stop waiting for perfect timing. You stop searching for loud confirmation, and you start noticing what has always been there, quiet but consistent, guiding but never forcing. And that shift alone can change the way decisions are made, the way risks are seen, and the way life begins to unfold. And in this video, you are going to learn how to recognize the signs that most people ignore, why they appear only once in certain moments, and how to respond before they disappear. Because timing is not always about patience. Sometimes it is about awareness, and awareness comes from understanding what to look for. And by the end of this video, you will not only see these patterns more clearly, but you will also start questioning the moments you once dismissed, the choices you delayed, and the signals you may be overlooking right now. And this is not about fear or pressure, it is about clarity. Because once clarity appears, hesitation starts to lose its power, and decisions become easier to make, not because everything is certain, but because you begin to trust what you see and feel. And that trust is what separates those who move forward from those who stay in the same place waiting for another sign that may never come again. So if something here feels real, if something feels like it connects with a thought you have been pushing aside, then stay with this until the end. Because what comes next may change the way you interpret the moments happening in your life right now. And if you want more content that helps you see things differently, understand yourself more deeply, and recognize the patterns that shape your path, then welcome to the channel. Take a second to subscribe, because sometimes the smallest decision to stay connected leads to the biggest changes later. A quiet truth sits beneath most turning points in life, and it rarely announces itself in a way people expect, because life does not always speak loudly. It does not always create clear signals or dramatic moments that force attention. And more often than not, it moves in silence, in subtle shifts, in small feelings that pass quickly if ignored. And sometimes it whispers only once, so softly that it blends into normal thoughts, daily routines, or brief emotions that seem insignificant at first. And this is where many people misunderstand their own lives, because they keep waiting for something obvious, something big, something impossible to miss, while the real signals pass through unnoticed, hidden inside ordinary moments. And over time, this creates a powerful illusion, the feeling of being stuck, the belief that nothing is happening, that life is not moving forward. But in reality, something did happen. Something important appeared and disappeared, and it was not recognized for what it truly was. And this is why the idea needs to shift, because people are not always stuck in the way they think. They are often standing after a missed moment, looking ahead for something that already came and went. And that missed moment could have been anything. A feeling that said this path is no longer right. A sudden thought about changing direction. A quiet realization about a relationship. A small opportunity that did not look perfect. And these moments are easy to ignore because they do not feel urgent. They do not feel certain. They do not feel safe. And the mind quickly finds reasons to push them away, to delay action, to return to what feels familiar. And that is where the deeper problem begins, because the mind is not designed to chase uncertainty. It is designed to protect comfort. And comfort often comes at the cost of awareness. So instead of noticing the meaning behind these signals, people move past them, thinking they will come back later in a clearer form. But that is not always how life works. Some signals are not meant to repeat. Some opportunities exist only in a specific moment, under specific conditions, and once those conditions change, the opportunity disappears with them, and the only trace left behind is a feeling that something could have been different. And this connects directly to why people miss these signs in the first place. Because it is not about intelligence, it is not about capability, it is about patterns of thinking that quietly block awareness. And one of the strongest of these patterns is overthinking, the habit of analyzing every possibility until clarity turns into confusion. Because when a moment appears that requires a decision, the mind starts creating scenarios, weighing risks, imagining outcomes, and in the process it slows everything down until the moment passes. And what could have been a simple step forward becomes a missed chance. And alongside overthinking there is fear, not always obvious fear, but a subtle resistance to change, because change means stepping into something unknown, leaving behind what feels stable, even if that stability is not fulfilling, and the mind prefers familiar discomfort over unfamiliar possibility. So it creates hesitation, it creates doubt, it creates reasons to wait, and waiting becomes another trap. Because the idea of perfect timing feels logical, it feels responsible, it feels like the right approach, but in reality perfect timing rarely exists. And most meaningful opportunities come with uncertainty. They come when things are not fully prepared, when confidence is not complete, when clarity is not perfect, and those who wait for everything to align often end up watching the moment pass without acting. And then there is another layer, the quiet doubt in one's own intuition, the feeling that inner signals cannot be trusted, that logic must always come first, that decisions must be proven before they are made. And while logic has its place, it is not always the first signal that appears, because many important moments begin as a feeling, a sense that something is right or wrong, before there is clear evidence, and ignoring that feeling creates distance from one's own awareness, and over time it becomes harder to recognize these signals at all. And this is where the truth becomes clear, not as a judgment, but as an understanding. You did not miss these moments because you were unlucky. You missed them because you hesitated, because the mind delayed action long enough for the moment to fade. And this hesitation is not a personal failure. It is a learned pattern, a response shaped by fear, by habit, by the desire to avoid risk. But once it is seen, it can begin to change. And the first sign that often appears before any major shift in life is something most people try to avoid, something uncomfortable, something that feels like a problem at first. And that is the sudden sense that something is off, a feeling that a situation no longer fits, that a routine feels heavier than before, that conversations feel different, that environments feel limiting. And this discomfort does not always have a clear explanation. It can appear without warning, in places that once felt right, in relationships that once felt stable, in paths that once felt certain. And because it does not come with clear reasons, it is easy to dismiss, to label it as temporary, as stress, as overreaction. But this kind of discomfort is rarely random. It is often a signal of growth, a sign that something has changed internally, even if the external world looks the same. And growth creates tension because it pushes against what is familiar. It creates a gap between who you are becoming and what you are still holding on to. And that gap feels uncomfortable. It feels uncertain. It feels like something is wrong. But in many cases, nothing is wrong. Something is simply changing. And this is where people make a critical mistake. They try to remove the discomfort instead of understanding it. They try to return to the old version of stability instead of exploring why it no longer feels right. And in doing so, they miss the message behind the feeling. Because that discomfort is not there to stop you. It is there to move you. It is the beginning of a shift, the first signal that something new is trying to enter your life, while something old is ready to leave. And ignoring it does not make it disappear. It only delays the process. And over time, that small discomfort can grow into frustration, into confusion, into a stronger sense that something is not aligned. And at that point, it becomes harder to ignore, but also harder to act on. Because the moment when it was subtle and easier to respond has already passed. And this is why recognizing it early matters. not as a source of pressure, but as a source of awareness. Because when you start to see discomfort differently, not as a problem but as a signal, everything begins to shift. The way decisions are made changes, the way situations are interpreted changes, and instead of running away from that feeling, there is a pause, a moment of attention, a question about what it might be trying to show. And that question alone creates space for clarity. Space that most people never allow because they are too focused on escaping the feeling instead of listening to it. And once that pattern starts to break, the signs that once felt invisible begin to stand out more clearly, not because they became louder, but because attention has changed, and attention is what determines what is seen and what is missed in the first place. Movement begins in the smallest, quietest way, and sometimes it arrives in a form that feels almost accidental, something that appears without warning, without planning, without effort. And because it does not match the idea of what a big opportunity should look like, it is often ignored or delayed. And this is where the second sign hides, inside moments that seem random, a message that comes at an unusual time, an idea that forms suddenly without a clear reason, a chance encounter, an invitation that feels unexpected, a possibility that was not being searched for. And because it does not feel structured or guaranteed, the mind quickly questions it, asks if it is worth it, asks if it is safe, asks if it should be taken seriously. And in that questioning, the moment begins to lose its energy, it starts to fade. Not because it was meaningless, but because attention moved away from it. And what makes these moments important is not their size, but their timing. They appear when something is ready to shift, when a door is slightly open, when a path becomes visible for a short period of time. And this visibility does not last forever. It exists only within a certain window. And once that window closes, the same opportunity may not return in the same form again. And this is why it often feels like life moves on without waiting. Because in a way it does, it offers, then it continues. And people often believe that real opportunities will come back stronger, clearer, louder. But that belief creates delay, it creates hesitation, it creates a false sense of security that there will always be another chance. And while sometimes there is, many times there is not. Many times the moment that felt small was actually the beginning of something much larger. And missing it means missing the path that could have followed. And this is why the simple truth holds weight. Opportunities do not always knock twice. Sometimes they just pass by. And they pass quietly, without announcing their value, without explaining their importance. And only later does it become clear what that moment really was. When the connection is seen, when the pattern becomes visible, when the realization forms that something meaningful was present but not recognized. And this recognition often comes too late, not as regret alone, but as understanding, understanding that awareness matters more than waiting, that attention matters more than certainty, and that the ability to notice is often more important than the ability to plan. And as this awareness grows, another sign begins to stand out more clearly, one that does not come from outside but from within, repeating itself in a way that is difficult to ignore completely, even though many try, and that is the persistence of certain thoughts, the same idea returning again and again, sometimes quietly, sometimes strongly, but always present in the background. And these thoughts are not random, they are not just noise, they are signals that something has not been resolved, something has not been acted on, something is asking for attention, and the mind has a tendency to push these thoughts away, to label them as distractions, to replace them with more practical concerns, to delay them until a better time. But what is often overlooked is the pattern itself, the repetition, because if an idea keeps returning, if it continues to appear despite being ignored, there is a reason behind it. And that reason is not always immediately clear, but it carries meaning, it carries direction, it carries a message that is trying to surface, and ignoring it does not remove it, it only delays its expression, and over time that repetition can grow stronger, more frequent, more difficult to push aside. And this is where frustration can begin, not because the thought is unwanted, but because it demands attention that is not being given. And this creates a kind of internal tension, a feeling of being pulled in a direction that is not being followed. And that tension is not accidental, it is part of the process. It is the mind trying to bring something into awareness that has been left unaddressed. And the longer it is ignored, the more persistent it becomes, until it reaches a point where it can no longer be dismissed easily. And at that point it either turns into action or into deeper conflict. And this is why the idea becomes important. If it keeps returning, it is trying to tell you something, not in a dramatic or mystical way, but in a consistent and direct way. It is pointing towards something that matters, something that requires attention, something that may lead to change if followed. And this does not mean every thought is meaningful, but repeated patterns carry weight, especially when they connect to emotion, to curiosity, to a sense of direction that does not fade over time. And recognizing this pattern shifts the way thoughts are treated, from something to ignore to something to observe. And that observation creates space for understanding, space that allows the message behind the repetition to become clearer. And as this clarity begins to form, another sign often appears, one that feels heavier, one that feels more disruptive, one that feels like loss. And loss has a way of being misunderstood, because it is often seen only as an ending, something negative, something to resist, something to fix or reverse. But loss also carries another function, one that is less visible but equally important. It creates space. It removes what is no longer aligned. It clears what is no longer needed. And this process is rarely comfortable. It can involve losing people who once felt close, losing plans that once felt certain, losing stability that once felt secure. And in those moments, it can feel like everything is moving in the wrong direction, like something important is being taken away. And that feeling is real, it is valid, but it is not the full picture. Because what leaves is not always meant to stay, and what disappears is not always meant to return. And this is where the perspective begins to shift, not by denying the difficulty of loss, but by understanding its role, understanding that sometimes what leaves is making space for what is meant to arrive, even if that arrival is not immediate, even if it takes time to become visible. And this understanding does not remove the discomfort, but it changes the meaning behind it. It turns loss from something purely negative into something that carries potential, something that opens possibilities that were not available before. And this does not happen instantly. It unfolds gradually, as new paths begin to appear, as new connections form, as new directions become visible. And often these new directions would not have been possible without the space created by what was lost. And this is why holding on too tightly can delay growth, because it prevents the space needed for something new to enter. And recognizing this pattern changes the way loss is experienced, from something that must be avoided at all costs to something that can be understood, even if it is not fully accepted right away. And as these signs begin to connect, the random opportunities, the repeating thoughts, the unexpected losses, a larger picture starts to form, one that shifts the entire perspective on what has been happening. And this shift leads to a turning point, not a dramatic moment, but a quiet realization that changes everything. A realization that life may not be ignoring you, that the silence you felt was not empty, that the waiting you experienced was not without meaning, and that perhaps the answers you were looking for have already appeared in different forms, forms that were not recognized at the time. And this realization can feel both clear and unsettling, because it removes the idea that nothing has happened and replaces it with the understanding that something did happen, but it was not acted on. And this is where responsibility begins to shift, not as blame, but as awareness. Awareness that the next moment will not be different unless the response is different. And this leads to a deeper truth, one that is simple but not always easy to accept. You are not waiting for a sign, you are deciding whether to act on it. And this decision happens quietly, often without being noticed. In the moments when hesitation appears, when doubt speaks, when delay feels safer than movement. And recognizing this decision is what changes everything, because it brings control back to the present. It turns waiting into choosing. It turns uncertainty into possibility. And it creates a new way of seeing the same moments that once felt unclear. And as this awareness settles in, the patterns that once seemed random begin to make more sense, not as isolated events, but as connected signals pointing in a direction that is now becoming visible. And that visibility changes the way the next moment will be experienced, even before it arrives. Something settles differently when you start to see these moments for what they really are. Not random, not meaningless, not just passing thoughts or events, but signals that have been there longer than you realized, waiting to be noticed. And maybe this isn't your first sign. Maybe this is your reminder, the one that feels clearer, the one that stays a little longer, the one that doesn't let you scroll past it so easily, because deep down there is a quiet recognition building, a sense that something you once ignored is starting to make sense now. And that shift, even if it feels small, is where everything begins to change, not all at once, not in a dramatic way, but in the way you think, the way you decide, the way you respond when the next moment appears. And that next moment will come, maybe sooner than expected, maybe in a form that feels familiar now, because once you become aware, the same patterns don't pass unnoticed anymore. And this time the difference will not be the sign itself, it will be what you choose to do with it. Because awareness without action changes nothing, but awareness with action creates movement, and movement creates direction, and direction leads to a life that feels different. Not perfect, not easy, but real, aligned, and intentional. And if something in this video connected with you, if even one part made you pause and think differently, then don't let this be another moment that fades away. Stay connected. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who might need this reminder right now. Because sometimes the smallest decision to engage with the right message at the right time can open something much bigger later. And sometimes the moment you finally notice is the moment everything begins to change.